Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to a discussion on pre-market tobacco product applications with Jeff Stier, hosted by EAS Consulting Group, Labstat International, and moderated by EAS President Dean Cirotta. EAS and Labstat are members of the certified group of companies, and EAS is a regulatory leader in FDA solutions. EAS is a leader in regulatory solutions for industries regulated by FDA and USDA. Our global network of over 150 independent advisors and consultants enables EAS to provide comprehensive training, consulting, and auditing services, ensuring proactive regulatory compliance. Labstat International is the world's largest independent analytical chemistry, in vitro toxicology, and method development lab focused on testing of consumer vapor products, e-liquids, and all other nicotine-containing products. Today, we are pleased to have with us Jeff Stier. Jeff is a senior fellow at the Consumer Choice Center and Taxpayer Protection Alliance and is a policy advisor to the Heartland Institute. His work focuses on regulation of innovative products and how their technologies can solve intractable public health problems. He has testified and participated in various FDA tobacco hearings, public health conferences, and was engaged with Congress as it developed the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act, which gave FDA regulatory authority over tobacco products. Dean Cirotta is president of EAS Consulting Group and a highly accomplished executive with a career history in managing regulatory affairs and compliance, quality assurance and control, operations, and manufacturing. He, along with his colleague, Dr. Tara Lynn Couch, who is EAS Senior Director for Dietary Supplement and Tobacco Services, have been actively involved in tobacco regulatory requirements for well over 10 years, cementing EAS reputation in the industry through the assessment of quality systems, implementation of quality improvements, preparation for FDA inspections and anticipated tobacco product manufacturing practices, and of course, assisting clients with submissions of pre-market tobacco applications. Today is the first in a two-part series on PMTAs, with part 2 on May 26, focusing on deficiency letter readiness. And that one will be hosted by or moderated by Labstat President Michael Bond. And our speaker will be Dr. Willie McKinney, who is scientific advisor to Labstat International. And more information on that can, of course, be found on the EAS webpage. With that, I will say thank you very much for joining EAS, and I'm pleased to introduce Jeff Stier and Dean Cirotta.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to listen in on the webinar. Jeff, welcome. Look forward to speaking with you. So let's get right into it. Jeff, why don't we just start with you giving everybody an update on what we know and what you're hearing about the status of the PMTA review process at FDA, and we'll start at that level.
Thanks, Dean, and thanks for hosting this event, and thanks to everyone for joining. What we're hearing is not very much, but I think as we're going to get into in today's conversation is there are a lot of tobacco leaves or tea leaves that we could read by some of the news coming out. And look, we know companies that have products on the market that did not submit a PMTA there's enforcement going on. I personally would like to see more enforcement, but there's enforcement if you didn't even submit an application. If you did submit an application, the FDA is not announcing everything, although there are some things on the web that try to track it. But we're not hearing much. Obviously, the pandemic had an impact. But as we'll get into in the conversation today, certainly the tobacco division at FDA is doing its work. It hasn't ignored the PMTAs, and it's going through the deliberative process that it said it would. And if we can look at the history of PMTAs in terms of IQOS or MRTPs, we know these are slow-moving processes. We know everything at the FDA is slow, but we know that on this front, the agency is moving deliberatively, and not as transparently as some might hope, but recognizing that there is competitive information in these applications. So also there's a kind of a limit on what the FDA does want to share publicly at this point.
Great. Hey, Jeff, let's just move on to some of the current topics. Given the article this week in the Wall Street Journal What are your thoughts on the potential ban on menthol cigarettes and how that may or may not affect or apply to e-cigarettes?
Sure. Look, we know that FDA has been looking at menthol for a long time. We know that when Congress developed the law that gave the agency authority, the law got held up because of menthol, and it took an extra year to pass the Tobacco Control Act because of a debate over menthol. The FDA at the time banned flavored cigarettes. The FDA didn't have to do anything, it was just banned. Menthol cigarettes were in their own category where the FDA had the authority to ban them, but they weren't banned. The FDA began to take a look at that. There was a Tobacco Product Scientific Advisory Committee meeting. There were a set of meetings. Those meetings got thrown out. They were illegal. They got brought back in. And the FDA, in order to ban menthol under the law, it has the authority to do it, but it has to find that menthol cigarettes have a negative impact on public health. For instance, they make it harder to stop smoking cigarettes, or they make it easier to start smoking cigarettes. So there was a big debate back at those TPSAC hearings. Do menthol cigarettes have a calming effect when you smoke them, or do they have a numbing effect? And if it's a numbing effect, that may make it easier to begin smoking and lead to increased initiation. But that whole discussion on menthol cigarettes is about menthol cigarettes. It is not about e-liquid. Now, we'll get into conversations about the former FDA commissioner, Dr. Gottlieb, and some of the things he says. He seems to be doing quite a lot of talking for someone who wanted to be able to spend more time with his family when he left FDA. But he's been doing a lot of talking, and he talked about menthol, this potential ban on menthol. And he made it very clear, this is, again, after he was commissioner, but when he was commissioner, that was the idea during the Trump administration, was put out there again to ban menthol. It got killed later on in the administration, but it may now be rearing its head again. But any news that you hear on menthol is about menthol, according to Dr. Gottlieb, who I think would be in the know on this, would be about menthol cigarettes. Menthol e-liquid is another conversation, hopefully, that we'll have.
And while we're on that article from the Wall Street Journal, what thoughts do you have on the potential proposal to reduce nicotine levels in cigarettes to the non-addictive level?
Dean, that's an important question. I know a lot of the participants in this call, many friends of mine and many people who probably know these issues as well as anybody, can think back to July 27th, 2017. Let me say, most people here are very interested in e-liquid. And when you hear a shift to nicotine, lowering nicotine in combustible cigarettes, you might think that doesn't affect my e-liquid business. Well, I'll tell you, it does. It very much does. And we've got up here the announcement. You can Google it later. FDA announces comprehensive regulatory plan to shift trajectory of tobacco-related disease and death. That's from July 27th, 2017, about 4 years ago. And in that major announcement that came out of the FDA from Dr. Scott Gottlieb, together with Mitch Zeller, who heads the tobacco division, that was a really shocking announcement that the FDA was going to begin a proposed rulemaking on lowering the amount of nicotine in combustible cigarettes. And that basically amounts to prohibition, and we haven't done very well with prohibition in this country. And in fact, Congress realized that. And when Congress passed the Tobacco Control Act, it actually said, because these things had been considered in the past, there have been scientific discussions. The Congress said to the FDA, you have the authority to regulate tobacco products. You have to automatically, flavors are banned. Menthol, it's up to you based on the public health. But when it comes to nicotine, the Congress gave the authority to the FDA, if they so chose, to lower nicotine in combustible cigarettes, but not to zero it out. And that's going to be an important issue. So the FDA has the authority to lower nicotine in combustible cigarettes. All along, that discussion and the scientific discussion in the tobacco control community has been about, hey, maybe what if we gradually decrease nicotine 10% a year or whatever it may be? And the studies on that were pretty clear that you're going to have what they call compensatory smoking. If people smoke for the nicotine but die from the tar, and you cut down the amount of nicotine, people are going to smoke more to get more of the nicotine they want and get more of the harmful stuff. So everybody realized that was a bad idea. So where did this come from? This is a new, different approach to lowering nicotine, and that is to lower nicotine in combustible cigarettes to non-addictive and non-satisfying levels. That means, according to Mitch Zeller and Scott Gottlieb at the time, Mitch Zeller is still there, that if we lower nicotine in combustible cigarettes to an amount that doesn't even satisfy you when you smoke, you're not going to smoke more, you're just not going to smoke. It's so little nicotine. And they said this is a very long-term plan. This is a generational plan, so that in the future, when people begin using nicotine products, they're not going to use a cigarette, the most harmful, the FDA acknowledged the most harmful of nicotine products, along with the FDA calls a continuum of risk, and that for adults who need or want, that was the FDA's language, and it's in that document, need or want to use nicotine, they're going to use lower risk products. So to me, that July 27, 2017 announcement, which died on the vine during the Trump administration, somebody killed it, has now been revived, at least the nicotine part of it. There was an extension on PMTAs, that's no longer relevant. But that nicotine plan, which was developed by Mitch Zeller with Scott Gottlieb under the Trump administration and got killed in the Trump administration, Mitch Zeller is bringing it back up. And in order to do that, and I'm quoting here from that press release from Dr. Gottlieb at the time, our approach to nicotine must be accompanied by a firm foundation of rules and standards for newly regulated products, your products. And listen to this, to be successful in this nicotine reduction in combustible cigarettes, to be successful, all of these steps must be done in concert and not in isolation. That is, if the FDA were to move forward with this plan, and there are lots of issues that's another call, but if the FDA were to move forward with it, as reported this week that they may be doing, in order for that to work, and Mitch Zeller has talked about this in public conferences, is we're not just trying to have, when you challenge him on prohibition, this isn't prohibition. We're going to be providing people IQOS, e-cigarettes, snus, all of these new products. And in order for this to work, there have to be new products. And while Mitch may have disagreed with me when I said, why not approve the new products before considering taking away the nicotine in cigarettes, he didn't think there needs to be an order to that. But he did say, and the FDA has said repeatedly, back when this 2017 plan was in play, that they need to be done in concert. They go together. You can't have one without the other. If you're an e-cigarette person, you should be happy about this because we're committing to it. If you're a tobacco control person, I know you're upset. We extended the PMTA deadline, but we're also taking away nicotine in cigarettes. So this is the renewal of an old plan developed by Zeller and Gottlieb that the Wall Street Journal reports is coming back. And it, to me, is the strongest signal, Dean, that we have that the FDA is committed to authorizing PMTAs in a range of products, not just IQOS has already happened. Now, this does not mean, we'll get into it later, this does not mean, okay, flavors, we're good to go. This means that from a policy perspective, if the FDA is moving forward with this type of approach, the FDA needs a range of products for adult smokers to use, and in the future, for people who, in the FDA's words, need or want nicotine, to initiate with. The FDA recognizes need or want, that the products that you will use for nicotine are going to be the lower risk products. And in order to have that plan, you need to have products. So I think this is actually a very positive sign to those who have submitted their PMTA and haven't gotten it thrown out. Stick with this. You may need to be more careful than you thought. You may have to double down on your science, but this is a sign that the FDA is committed to the principle, the concept of lower risk products being available, obviously balanced with the risks of youth using those products.
Great, that was excellent. Since you mentioned Zeller and Gottlieb, I want to take a few minutes, talk a few questions about the FDA. What are your thoughts on the status of an appointment of a new FDA commissioner and how this may affect things moving forward for the tobacco industry?
Dean, when we were preparing this call, I had just published a piece based on the news, an op-ed based on the news that it was either going to be Janet Woodcock, who headed up the drug division of the FDA for a very long time, versus Dr. Joshua Sharfstein, who has a very long list of credentials and is, I would say, a Bloomberg guy, a anti-e-cigarette guy, as strong as you could be. In fact, back when Congress was developing the Tobacco Control Act, Dr. Joshua Sharfstein was Henry Waxman's advisor on health issues. So when I said in the introduction, when I was engaged on this, Dr. Sharfstein was the guy we were dealing with on e-cigarette issues, or on, at the time, snus issues and harm reduction. He is not a friend. He is not an ally. And Sharfstein and Woodcock were seen as the main two people. Woodcock, very well credentialed on drugs, on the FDA's role in regulating drugs, has been there for a long time. She's the institutional choice. But there were some people who were concerned that she was in charge of the FDA's drug division when the whole opioid mess went on. So from the left, there has been some criticism of her. And we know that the president has been choosing people a little bit to the left. When it comes to Dr. Sharfstein, that would be kind of akin to, appointing Bernie Sanders as Secretary of the Treasury, right? I don't really see that realistically happening. And just a week or so ago, there was a new head of the drug division at the FDA, which suggests that Janet Woodcock, who has been the acting commissioner, hasn't been nominated, hasn't been confirmed by the Senate, but many people thought she was the front runner. The fact that her old job has someone else who's been named to it, suggests that she's not going back there. She's either going to be the commissioner, which raises the question, why wasn't she named yet? Because still in the midst of dealing with the pandemic, you would think we need an FDA commissioner, a confirmed one, nominated and confirmed by the Senate. She's kind of just filling the role right now. So the latest news suggests that she's not going back to her old job. She is either going to be the commissioner nominated, or she will retire. And the most recent press suggests there are a bunch of new names out there. So it's really a wild card. But to the extent, Dean, that the coverage we saw this week from the Wall Street Journal, the reporting on menthol, and the discussion about nicotine in combustible cigarettes, that's kind of big news. That moved markets. That, I think, is not something that would come out from an FDA, which does have a pretty controlled system of leaks. If this was leaked to the Wall Street Journal, and there haven't been a lot of leaks in the Biden administration, if this was leaked by the Wall Street Journal to kind of get people talking about it before it happened, it suggests to me that Woodcock has let Mitch Zeller run the show. If there's no acting commissioner, and the acting commissioner is Woodcock, who comes from a drug background and knows Zeller has been there doing what she would view as a competent job, and Zeller's still there. Zeller is running the show right now. Woodcock is saying, "Hey, go with it." So
let's talk about that for a minute. So let's assume, I mean, obviously, like you said, there's been a whole bunch of new names leaked out there as potentials, but let's stay on the Dr. Woodcock thing for a second, and assume that she does, she is given the permanent position. What do you think some of the key decisions might be made under her leadership regarding tobacco? And then the follow-up to that, I'll just kind of roll these together. Since you mentioned she was primarily has a pharmaceutical background, what does that mean for Mitch Zeller? Is he likely going to stay head of CTP? And how does that potentially affect how CTP moves forward, and what agenda Mitch wants to push forward?
Yep, that's a great question. With regard to Woodcock, look, we don't know. She is the front runner, I would say, despite someone taking her giving her old job to somebody, suggesting that she has nowhere to land if she doesn't get the job or take it. She's still the front runner, and she would have, or whoever else it would be, assuming it's not Sharfstein, which would be kind of whoa. She would have a lot of decisions. One of them would be menthol, which, according to the news reports and consistent with, there's been a citizens petition for the FDA to ban menthol in cigarettes. The FDA said they're going to reply, I think it was April 28th, in about a week. We may hear from the FDA on this within a court document. So this leak is probably combined to that. That was not something that Woodcock, who's stepping up to the role of commissioner in the midst of a pandemic, is going to take leadership on. That suggests to me that Woodcock has faith in Zeller and says, go ahead, you've been doing fine, go ahead and do it. But now we're going to go to your second part of your question, which is Mitch Zeller. Now, many people who are advocates for tobacco harm reduction in e-cigarettes aren't big fans of Mitch Zeller. And I could understand why. Look, he's been there for a while. This is his division. He has been accused of speaking out of both sides of his mouth. The terminology continuum of risk is something that you heard from him quite regularly during the Obama administration, during the Trump administration. He believes in the continuum of risk, but he has served as a counterweight to the politics. So during the Trump administration, Mitch Zeller planned on banning menthol and lowering nicotine in combustible cigarettes. Wow, in a deregulatory Trump administration. Obviously, it got nixed. Politics eventually stopped him, but it's the same Mitch Zeller. And if Mitch Zeller didn't get his plan across during the Trump administration, even though he introduced it and got people talking about it, obviously he plans on moving forward now. But to the extent that Mitch Zeller is a counterweight to the politics of the time, while you may not love what he did during the Trump administration, compare him to, say, Josh Sharfstein and who he might choose, Dr. Josh Sharfstein, who might be the new commissioner. Imagine if Dr. Sharfstein were the new commissioner. I don't think he'd go with Mitch Zeller. You would have someone in that Bloomberg style. Mitch Zeller is your biggest ally right now. He understands the science. He may not have been our friend during the Trump administration, but he believes in continuum of risk. He is committed to the PMTA process. And to the extent that he's committed to lowering nicotine in combustible cigarettes, he needs to approve PMTAs. So Mitch Zeller will be given a lot of free rein if you get a Janet Woodcock, or if you get somebody else who doesn't come with a strong nicotine or tobacco policy background. And in a pandemic, you would expect the Biden administration to choose somebody who's not a tobacco policy person or a tobacco control person, but really is a person on the pharmaceutical side. So I think the most likely scenario is that Mitch Zeller stays there and Mitch Zeller becomes your biggest ally because he is a believer in the continuum of risk and because he really wants to reduce nicotine levels in combustible cigarettes to levels that are no longer satisfying or addictive. And look, you need to give these people a place to go. You need to give them satisfying products. And in order to do that, you have to authorize PMTAs, at least for tobacco flavors and perhaps menthol flavors. And then we'll get into other flavors as we go.
Great. That was very interesting. Well, and that's a great segue into where I want to go next, which is more about the PMTAs. And just a reminder, and Amy helped me out here, there is available, if anybody has any questions to ask, there is a Q&A button at the bottom that you can hit and type in any questions that you have. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end to get to some of those. Is that correct, Amy?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
So Jeff, getting back to, your lead into PMTAs. So what are your thoughts on the FDA's announcement here in the last few months that they're going to prioritize the review of the PMTAs based on market share? And what do you think the impact of that decision and that process is going to be given the just huge numbers of applications that were submitted?
Dean, that was big news when everybody was rushing to get their PMTAs in before the deadline. Everybody was asking Mitch Zeller, how are you going to deal with this deluge of PMTA these applications and hundreds of millions of pages? He complained. They came by email, they came by letter, they came in digital format. He was complaining all the different formats they came in, and they've got to synthesize it all and how many there were. Back when that was going on before September, he was saying, hey, look, get those applications in early. We're accepting them early. That'll give us an opportunity to begin reviewing them. And maybe he didn't say it explicitly, but hey, look, the sooner you get it in, the sooner you'll get a ruling. You'll get a potential authorization. We'll be able to ask you questions. Yes, we're prepared for a lot, but get them in early. Don't wait till the last minute. Suggesting, hey, if you got yours in early, we may rule on yours earlier. Well, now all of a sudden, as if it was a surprise, there were going to be all these submissions, and a lot of them were good applications, right? They kicked out a whole bunch early on. Obviously, some people said, "Oh, I got to get my application in before the deadline," and they put in some document that you guys didn't work on, right? It was just some flimsy document. Look, those got tossed. Those are not even getting letters. Hey, we have questions about it. Those were obviously meant to keep, stay on the market without having done the application. But when the FDA, I'd say announced, but disclosed just in the last month or so that it was going to be giving priority in its review to the products that had the biggest market share, that was a really interesting and important announcement. If you're looking to, everybody wants to be first or among the first. People got their applications in early, but there was a lot of skepticism that, hey, the FDA is working with industry, with big tobacco, and these applications are so expensive and there's so much work to go into them. We're just going to consolidate and we're going to just have the big players left. Well, I'm not saying that's what's happening. However, the FDA's view is, look, we want to have the biggest impact on public health. Maybe foreshadowing the announcement about nicotine and combustible cigarettes. They want products to be on the market. The FDA said the products that have the biggest market share are going to get a little bit of a head start in terms of our review and may get answers first. Now, what the FDA did not say at the time, but I think is important, is that those applications, the big players, were very conservative. They didn't put in flavors in their applications. These were tobacco flavors. Look, we know flavors are critical to help adult smokers quit and maintain their cessation. And if the FDA wants to go ahead with that nicotine plan, they're going to need adults to find these products to be satisfying. They are going to need to approve flavors, but that's, we're just in the midst of this whole so-called epidemic of Juul and youth. I would say that what the FDA actually did was it bought itself some time, because the bigger applications, the one that have more market share, were among the most conservative applications that were not flavors. So what the FDA is going to do is they're going to look at tobacco flavored e-cigarettes. They're probably going to eventually, I can't tell you when, I don't know, grant some authorizations to the really good applications, but we're not going to get authorization of flavors. To me, that creates a market opportunity. Look, I'm sure there are lots of applications submitted for flavors by the smaller players. Those may not be strong applications just because they didn't have the resources. But to me, it's a market opportunity. Hey, put together a really good PMTA for a new product that's not on the market now. Put a good PMTA together for your flavored product. Learning from what comes out of FDA is coming out now, maybe it will be coming out in terms of what they authorize. And if the FDA authorizes a tobacco e-cigarette, tobacco flavored e-cigarette, learn from that application. Hey, what was persuasive to the FDA? How do I persuade them kids aren't going to start using this? What did we learn from the IQOS process? And get in an application, a really good application for a flavored e-cigarette, because we know those are needed. And you're going to.
Yeah, and Jeff, I want to get to flavors in a second, but there was a good question from one of the attendees that I hit while we're talking about this FDA decision for reviewing the products with the biggest market share. What do you think the FDA's bandwidth and resources are to accommodate this onslaught of PMTAs and MRTP submissions that they're going to see over the next few years? And is it going to just be a repeat of what we saw with SEs, where they sit and, we don't hear anything? Do you have any insight into, is the FDA better prepared from a bandwidth resource perspective for this PMTA round than they were for SEs?
So Mitch Zeller said yes. I think the FDA acknowledged that the process on SEs was not satisfactory. It's not how the FDA wanted to perform. Knowing that the deadline was coming and with all the extensions and the back and forth, the FDA claims that it prepared better for PMTAs and that it did have the bandwidth. Well, then the pandemic hit. I was a little bit disappointed to see the FDA complaining about all the different, how many applications there were and how many pages there were and how many different formats they came in. Those were all acceptable formats. So on the one hand, they said, yeah, we're more prepared for SEs. We know they're going to be a lot. We're prepared and we will be prepared going forward. On the other hand, there was the pandemic. And then it was a little bit disappointing to see the FDA complaining as if to say it's going to take us longer to get our assignment in because the dog ate my homework. Well, the FDA gave all those formats.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I never understood that. They're the ones that put the PMTA guidance together. Zeller was the one that pushed more science, more science, more science. And there was plenty of, early market studies that showed how many products are on the market, how many potential applications could be submitted. I never really understood that their rationale for coming out with that, what seemed to be whining to me about what they received. I mean, it wasn't a surprise to anybody else, I don't think.
No, and that's why I go back to answering this great question that came in, is on the one hand, Zeller would say, no, we're prepared. We've been preparing. We knew there were going to be a lot. And then to get that answer, oh, all the different formats, so much science. Well, you were expecting it. That to me suggests that while they said they were more prepared, and look, when the FDA put out its deeming rule, it made predictions on how much it would cost, how many there would be. Well, no surprise, maybe they were more than they expected, but no, the FDA clearly wasn't in a great position. Maybe it did a lot to prepare, but wasn't in a good position. And then of course, this is not a dog ate my homework. There was a pandemic and there is a pandemic, and that certainly affected the agency. And I do think that the agency is going to move beyond that 1 year that it has. Look, the FDA never meets deadlines, but they were supposed to rule on these applications within a year. Look, I think the pandemic will give them some more time, but that will allow products that are on the market legally now that have a valid application in, or an accepted application, or maybe not even accepted yet, but an application that hasn't been tossed. Those products are likely to stay on beyond September if the FDA doesn't rule on them. I think that's the expectation.
Yeah. And I know I cut you off, so, I want to get back to, let you finish on your thoughts on flavors. So, what is your perspective on the status of flavors and the likelihood of a flavored product being granted market authorization? Because as we know, or as some of us have heard, many of these applications were potentially prepared, just to get accepted and filed, and they really don't contain a lot of science, or maybe not as much science as the FDA was hoping to receive. So, where are you, just to let you kind of finish up on your thoughts on the whole, likelihood of a flavor approval and what these folks should be thinking about?
I think the bar will be extremely high for flavors. I think flavors will be last, not first. Obviously, when they talk about market share, well, there aren't flavors on the legal market with lots of market share. That was the FDA's way of saying without saying, as the saying goes. Saying without saying, we're going to approve tobacco flavored e-cigarettes first. And I know the FDA has acknowledged in its documents, in its rule making process, that there's a lot of evidence that says flavors are important for adult smokers. And the FDA says epidemic, youth, all of that. But when it comes down to it, the FDA recognizes the importance of flavors. And that conflicts with it, in its view, in the FDA's view, that conflicts with, hey, we need to protect kids. We want to allow e-cigarettes, but we have to protect kids. Your applications need to be able to show, how are you going to do that? How are you not going to appeal to kids? Now, a long time ago, when these rules were being drafted, before the FDA deeming rule came into effect, there was this debate. Are we going to ban flavors? This was, is the deeming rule going to ban flavors? Before we even get into PMDAs, let's ban flavors. And then there was a debate, maybe not ban flavors, but and everyone said gummy bear, right? Well, maybe ban the marketing of flavors that would appeal to kids, or marketing of names that would appeal to kids. And I think it's important for the industry to recognize the difference between flavors and things that appeal to kids, because those have been merged in the public policy debate right now. A number of senators called for FDA not to authorize any flavors in PMTAs. The FDA basically, I'm sorry, Congress, some members of Congress are basically telling the FDA not to implement the law that Congress passed to give FDA authority to use its judgment on things like flavors. And the FDA right now is in a very politically tough situation. And when I say Mitch Zeller really is going to be your best friend right now, that's because Zeller recognizes the importance of flavors. He knows it for adult smokers. Look, the epidemic, as he calls it, was on his watch. So he's going to be very sensitive to that. But you've got to balance flavors and kids. I think the best way to do that and get flavors across so that adults have choices that are satisfying and maintain their interest is to separate out gummy bear. Look, I don't think there are any PMTA. We don't know all the PMTAs, but I don't think there are any gummy bear PMTAs. Is the sexy, funny, markety names and the actual flavor. Don't get them confused. Cherry is a flavor. Some cherry berry flavor is more kid oriented. If you make that distinction, even though adults would like those fun sounding names, if the industry can help the FDA think through the application process, a distinction between a flavor, which is important to an adult, and the marketing of a flavor, I think that's the best bet.
One of the questions we got, and Jeff, I want to ask these as they fit in with what you're talking about instead of waiting till the end, is some of these flavor applications where maybe the science wasn't fully borne out prior to the application and they're still working on it. What are your thoughts on the FDA allowing them to stay on the market while they continue to generate this scientific data? Or do you think the FDA is going to take a more harder stance and say, hey, you're off the market, feel free to resubmit sometime in the future?
Look, my instinct is FDA would have been doing that already, would have been tossing more applications. Maybe that was the pandemic slowed them down. But look, you're going to hear a lot more from Dr. Willie McKinney in the next event about a lot of these scientific issues. But I think the important thing is your science is going to need to be really good. If you've gotten by this far, you're lucky. Maybe the pandemic bought you some time. But I think the FDA is clear that as it goes through them and as it sorts out the different formats, there are going to be a lot that are tossed. The FDA knows that people wanted to buy time. I'm surprised that more haven't been tossed yet. I think more will be tossed. But the real ones, the science-based ones, the ones that a lot of people here worked on, I think they're going to move. I think the FDA, because of consistent with what it said about nicotine and combustible cigarettes, the FDA wants products to be authorized.
Okay. We had another question from an attendee while we're on flavors. Jeff, do you think your analysis of flavors is limited to vape, or will FDA extend the same logic to other PMTA products like pouches?
It's funny. Having done this for so long, I twitch a little bit when I hear FDA and logic. They don't always go together. But yeah, of course, those are critical questions. And, look back at the MRTPs on snus, right? You have to have flavors in snus in these smokeless products. And I think you're going to have flavors in e-cigarettes. But if, the FDA, the question is my analysis of flavors limited to vape? I think there are two categories. There is flavored cigarette, or there are multiple categories. There's flavored cigarettes, there's menthol cigarettes, and then there are reduced risk products. And I think the FDA is looking at reduced risk products, but then in a subcategory, I'm pretty sure there was a menthol IQOS that got authorization. That's a flavor, obviously not a cherry flavor. But when you look at menthol, with all the news over menthol, the FDA authorizing an IQOS product with menthol, surprising maybe. But the FDA's view was, and we saw this in TPSAC, was we don't have a problem of youth initiation. So I would say, so long as we don't have a problem or even a perceived problem, because we know people are drumming up potential problems here, As long as we don't have what could be taken as an epidemic of youth snoozing, which I don't think we have, I think flavors are going to be in a much better position. I think the problem from the FDA's perspective, the FDA is going to scream and shout Juul all you want, but the problem is that youth were using flavored products. Now, look, if flavored products weren't out on the market at the time, I think youth would have been using tobacco-flavored e-cigarettes. I don't think flavors are the problem. But the FDA right now is grasping at straws or grasping at e-cigarettes, if you will, because of flavors. So I think it's the flavors in e-cigarettes because of the, you can call it the recency heuristic or the recency bias, because of the perception of the problem with youth e-cigarette use because of flavors. The FDA is going to be very cautious about flavors, specifically on e-cigarettes, and then more generally cautious, but not as cautious, because they didn't just have a problem with snus. And if we don't have a problem with snus or next generation products and flavors, there's going to be a higher bar for flavors of other products, but not as high as e-cigarettes.
Well, you've mentioned a couple of things that I think leads to a next question. You've mentioned snus and IQOS a couple of times today. What are you hearing specifically about ongoing reviews, requests for different additional information? And if we're not hearing much, is there anything we can learn from the snus and IQOS?
Dean, that's I think the way you have to look at it. What can we learn? We're not hearing much. I'm not hearing much. But look, I don't have an application in, so maybe that's why I'm not hearing much. But if you have applications and you're hearing things, that's interesting. Look, there's some conversations going on, undoubtedly. But I don't, we're not hearing as much as I would have liked to have heard. And yeah, the pandemic further complicates things to the extent that the news report that just came out about menthol and about nicotine, the FDA has been working on stuff, although all Mitch Zeller had to do was take out his July 27th, 2017 announcement, dust it off and release it during the Biden administration. It's going to be in a much stronger position. But if you haven't heard from them yet, I don't think you should be surprised. I don't think you should feel alone. We knew this was going to take a long time. I don't think the FDA is going to toss serious applications especially for non-flavored products, without asking some questions. And when it comes to these applications, I think the FDA wants to have a give and take. It wants to understand the issues better. But when it comes to flavors, there may be nothing deficient in your application. The FDA may have already decided, and this may be a surprise to you, maybe not. The FDA, okay, let me roll back 1 second. When the deeming rule came out and it didn't ban flavors, I'm pretty sure it was NPR, asked the FDA, hey, why didn't you ban flavors? Kids, this is in the early days. Why don't you ban flavors? Kids are using flavors. The FDA said, no, we didn't outright ban flavors, but Congress gave us the authority to do this PMTA process and deem these products. And when we rule on them, if we decide that flavored products are not a benefit to the public health by being on the market at an individual level and at a public health community-wide level, then we're not going to approve them. Initially, the deeming rule actually had a flavor ban in it during the Obama administration, and that got cut out, presumably by HHS. The higher-ups in the Obama administration killed a flavor ban, believe it or not. Mitch Zeller wrote the flavor ban in the deeming rule that got nixed. Well, Mitch Zeller also wrote the nicotine rule that came out during the Trump administration that got nixed. Well, maybe Mitch Zeller wants a flavor ban in e-cigarettes. He tried to do it. He got nixed in the Obama administration. And now he doesn't need Congress. He's reviewing PMTAs. And what he said at the time to NPR was, there's nothing to stop the FDA from not authorizing a flavored product because we don't believe it's in the benefit of the public health for this product to be on the market. That would be a de facto flavor ban. You wouldn't need Congress to pass a new law. So I'd be concerned about that. And that's why I think there needs to be this distinction between flavors and the marketing of flavors.
So just to kind of go back to the lack of information, the FDA has said for a while they were going to issue a list of applications that have been submitted. We're not really seeing anything. What should companies be inferring or thinking about, due to this lack of information, lack of status from the FDA on where they are and what kind of progress they're making. Like you said, if you don't have an application in, you don't know a whole lot.
Right. And to me, that's good news. Right? If you haven't heard anything, that means they haven't tossed you. If they thought you were just putting your application in to buy you time, and you haven't been tossed yet, well, that's good news. But I do think now is the time to double down on your science. I think it's great that you're having Dr. Willie McKinney on in a few weeks to discuss some of the scientific issues, because when you don't want to get a phone call or an email from the FDA, because we know they're giving to the extent we know anything, they're giving very short period of time to respond. You don't want to be caught off guard. You've got this time now. Look, I understand you don't want to be investing in new products with all the uncertainty, but if you have an application in, you want to be as prepared as you can for that day when you hear from the FDA. You don't want them to tell you we're throwing out your application. We want you to be getting questions. And I think you need to be as prepared as you can be for that. We don't know, I would tell you they're going to be concerned about youth initiation and how they're going to want more on that. But if they ask you that question, that means everything else seems to be okay. And what we've seen with the FDA's, I wouldn't call it an announcement, but the news report this week is that they want products to be authorized. You want to be their partner. Look, don't trust them. They're not your friend. But you want to make them look good by authorizing your product, because they're going to need to authorize your product, some products.
So just kind of take that one more step. Given the limited information that that's publicly available about, what we're seeing as far as deficiencies and requests for additional information under the current review. So what should companies be doing now? You kind of just touched on it a little bit about, building up your science, but what should companies be doing now as the FDA is moving forward with these substantive reviews?
Well, going back, and again, I think the answer goes back to your last question, and what can we learn from the MRTPs and the Pmtas that we've gotten some news on, whether it was ICOS or Swedish Match, is we have, Mitch Zeller has stated as much. Why is it taking so long back then? We're having conversations with the applicants, he would say, things like that. So look, I wasn't in on those calls. There are probably people here who were, who had applications in, and I think those people were well prepared. Those are substantive questions. You may roll your eyes when you hear them and think, oh my God, we already answered that. Well, not to the satisfaction of the FDA. So that's why I say you want to double down on your science. They may seem like idiots by asking these questions, but if they're asking you questions, you're in a better position than if they're not asking you questions.
Right. And we know Willie's going to be covering hopefully a lot of this in more detail next month. So more to come on that. We've got a few questions that I'd like to kind of go back on and throw out there for you. And one is about, in the past, FDA being challenged legally on various things. And one of the attendees wanted to know if you foresee challenges to this potential decrease of nicotine levels, and whether, those types of court actions could hold things up for the FDA moving forward.
Yeah. Well, in short, yes. And you heard me allude to earlier that the nicotine rule, the FDA gave FDA authority to lower nicotine, but not zero it out. Well, Mitch Zeller will say the reason this plan works and doesn't cause compensatory smoking is because there's so little nicotine, like almost none. Like, he's a lawyer, a de minimis level. Like, if the FDA said you couldn't ban nicotine and you leave that much nicotine in, you've basically banned nicotine, and Congress didn't give the FDA authority to do that. So that would be the type of lawsuit you would see, but we're still a long way off there. Look, I think the nicotine in combustible cigarettes, as Mitch Zeller has said, is intricately tied. You can't have one without the other. They're done in concert and not in isolation. Very relevant to this discussion, but I think most relevant to this discussion with regard to that is it gives you a sense of the FDA's mindset, of its plans, of its approach. Go back to that July 27th, 2017 FDA announcement. You're going to see, in a nutshell, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jeff A. Stier. I've been commenting on this, is the FDA's approach, the reason that there aren't going to be problems with this plan, it says, is because the nicotine levels are so low that people aren't going to want to smoke more. All of that is based on modeling. The FDA says it's based on research. What kind of research? Modeling research. And as you know, with modeling, if you put garbage in, you get garbage out. So I would challenge the FDA science on that. But look, if the FDA is committed to that and it's going in that direction, in fact, the July 27th, 2017 announcement said the FDA is going to be doing more research. Well, we haven't seen research on that. We haven't seen, who puts out a plan to change the whole face of an entire industry that would actually affect public health and illicit markets and more dangerous products without doing the science first? This would be a mass experiment on the American public without having done the science. So it's bizarre that the FDA would say, we're going back in 2017, and maybe again now, we're going to do this and we're going to do more research on it. Well, usually if your policy is based on science, you do the science and then you come up with policy based on your findings. Not you say, this is our policy agenda and here's why. And now we're going to use taxpayer money to do the research to support our policy. That's not the way it works, FDA.
A couple questions that have come in, one on science and one on, let me hit the one with nicotine levels. One of the questions is, will nicotine levels also hit heated tobacco products such as IQOS and other products like snus?
You know, right now, if you go back again to this July 27, 2017 document, that was all about combustible cigarettes. And the reason the FDA wants to reduce nicotine in combustible cigarettes is because combustible cigarettes fall on the continuum risk as the most dangerous form of consuming nicotine. So the answer is on this front, no, because the FDA has stated the reason it wants to lower nicotine is so that it's no longer sustains or satisfies or creates an addiction. That's how de minimis low it's going to be. And that reasoning would not apply to heated tobacco products or snus. That being said, you know, the EU has a very different approach to nicotine. The EU has been, you know, I think more permissive and less problematic. I mean, look at how the UK handled it at least. But the EU had a nicotine cap on e-cigarettes. And if you look at the UK, where they've been really good at looking at the data, lots of people have quit smoking using e-cigarettes, and they certainly haven't had an epidemic of youth vaping. The UK handled it really well in the confines at the time of the TPD, the EU rules, which cap nicotine. I would just continue to have my guard up, because one of the big differences, the two big differences are the UK didn't demonize e-cigarettes and say, kids, don't use these, right? And put out all these campaigns. The US did, and raised the profile of these products, I think leading to some of the problems we've had. But they also cap nicotine. And I think if once you start seeing PMTAs out there and the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids wants to find new ways of making your lives difficult, I think you're going to see an increased focus on the amount of nicotine allowed in e-cigarettes. Maybe arguing that the higher levels of nicotine lead to more initiation, and therefore it's about kids. And again, they ignore the issue of adults wanting higher levels of nicotine. But I think the issue of nicotine in e-cigarettes is going to be more about capping levels in a different way than we're hearing about now, and it's not part of the policy that was leaked this week.
So you're saying you don't think that necessarily e-cigarette lowering or capping nicotine on e-cigarettes is the main priority? Not
right now. I do think it's something to be concerned about, but when you hear people talking about the FDA is going to lower nicotine in cigarettes, it's talking about the combustible cigarette. Scott Gottlieb and Mitch Zeller made that clear back in 2017. I've heard them talk, I think it was Gottlieb on CNBC again, said that's about combustible cigarettes. That's not to say you won't see a cap on nicotine in e-cigarettes or other products, but this conversation is focused on the combustible product because of the reasoning that the FDA laid out in that 2017 announcement.
Okay. And then one other question that we had on nicotine. What is your position or the FDA's position, do you think, on synthetic nicotine products? Do you think this loophole might be addressed?
I don't think the FDA has, I think the FDA might recognize that there's a need to address the loophole. But when the FDA interpreted all sorts of authorities given to it by Congress, it did so very broadly. E-cigarette hardware is now a tobacco product, right? There's no tobacco in it. There's no tobacco in an e-cigarette, but the e-cigarette liquid got its nicotine from tobacco. So then it is a tobacco product. And therefore, because a vaping device is going to be used with an e-cigarette, which got its nicotine from tobacco, using that, like, I would call it the cooties explanation. I touched you, you touched him, you're all tobacco products now. It may take some regulatory work, but I have very little confidence that that loophole that anybody will get away with that loophole, at least long enough to make it worth their while. I think it's an obvious one. I think the FDA's view is, yeah, try it, see what happens.
Okay. Well, Jeff, this has been great. We're about out of time. I want to kind of give you a few minutes or a minute or so, whatever, to kind of make any other additional closing statements, or is there anything else you want to share with our attendees that maybe we didn't hit today? But I've enjoyed this conversation, but is there anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I've enjoyed it as well, Dean, and enjoyed the discussion with you, but really appreciate the audience participation. And look, you can always find me on Twitter at Jeff A. Stier, happy to engage a bit on there. But I really think this is a credit to what you guys are doing and helping people be prepared for these things. And I'm looking forward to watching Dr. Willie McKinney in a few weeks from now get into some of the more technical aspects of this.
Yeah, we're looking forward to the next conversation with Dr. McKinney. I know he's listening. We've had a couple of questions today that I think he's going to be getting into in more detail. One of the questions, Willie, we've been reluctant to conduct surveys of younger kids. Is that going to be needed in the future? I think I'm going to let that one hang there until we have a chance to talk with Willie. We're also going to talk about more about these additional requests for information. What are we seeing? What should companies be doing? We're also starting to see, virtual inspections by the FDA in relation to submitted PMTAs, and how the FDA is approaching it, how their FDA is approaching these under COVID, and how they're doing them virtually and literally lasting for weeks, and really taking up a lot of resources with applicants trying to respond to a lot of these manufacturing inspections in a timely manner. So a lot of other exciting things to talk about with Willie. Jeff, thanks again so much for your time today. I've enjoyed it. I hope everybody found this informative, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and we very much appreciate your time and your support.
Thank you.